Hey everybody, I am so excited today because I'm with two extraordinary women, really, truly extraordinary women who have written just a spectacular book that from the first word that I was reading it, I was just thinking, oh my God, it was so fresh and original and practical and true, like above all, true, that I was really overwhelmed. And I had the honor of reading one of the first drafts, and then the huge honor of writing the foreword for it. And yeah, such a privilege. I feel like here it is. It's like a work of genius art that every single household should have, every business should have, every school, every organization. It's just like there's nothing more that any of us need, I think, than this book. And we've got some time to talk about it, and for me to catch up with you too, because I'm so happy about that. So maybe could we start with, I could introduce you, but you would do it so much better, telling us about what has led you to this stage in your life and this stage of your understanding, and how the book, well, you know, this the stage of being able to write something like this, I think would be awesome to hear about. So yeah, should we start with Helen? Maybe lovely.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, lovely to be back with you. We've spent many a time on a Zoom call, so it's
Yeah, we have. It's so nice,
lovely
so
to see
nice,
you
love.
again. So for my journey kind of went from a very strange route from chemistry at uni to accountancy, failed within 3 months, to HR, which I did for a number of years, probably about 13, 14 years altogether, and then into psychology-based coaching. And that was kind of the real, I guess, the earnest beginning of self-development, thinking, well, if I can get my thinking right, then I will get my feelings right, and then I will have a really nice experience of life. And then a few years after that came to a point of saying, well, that's not totally worked. Some bits seems to be working, some bits it's going down the toilet. So that was what led me into an exploration which at the time I thought was just the three principles with Piers Thurston, but which fairly soon into it I discovered was a combination of three principles and non-duality, which in itself was kind of annoying because I thought I'd found the thing in this thing that was being called the three principles. I thought it was the thing. I found the one silver bullet thing. And then so when my friend said, oh, it sounds like he's talking about non-duality, I was, what do you mean? There's another thing? I thought this was the only thing now. So yeah, so I worked with Piers for a few months, had quite a significant awakening with him. And then, Claire, I came to your world. So beginning of 2019, and really for 2 years, wasn't it? We were quite, I was very deeply involved with all your courses and explorations and mastermind, and a huge amount of what it sometimes, as you know, felt kind of annoying. You know, there were times in our one-to-one sessions where it's like, oh, expletive gifts, but incredibly powerful at turning the mirror on the ego to see all the places in life where false barriers have been put up and false ideas of, oh, it's them over there that's the problem, when in fact it was my own confusions that were the core of the problem. So massive undoing of a load of stuff in that. And then 2021 became a year for me of wanting to find my own voice, wanting to find my own place. And that was really a year of yeah, really at the core of it, undoing that contraction of fear that most humans walk around with, often without even realizing it. And then so towards the end of last year was when I had the initial idea for the book, which we'll talk more later in terms of how that then transpired into a book. But that was when the first inspiration came through of, oh, this is the book to write. So yeah, that's how I got here.
Oh, I love that, darling. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you for your part in it.
Oh,
And
such
your
an
books, of course, your books.
honor. Yeah. Oh, an angel. Thank you, loves. And Sarah, darling, what's brought you here?
My life happens largely by accident. My first degree, I didn't get the grades for the place I wanted to go. But alongside one of the local universities happening to have one of my friends as head of department, so they offered me a really low grade to make sure that I got in somewhere. The people who'd interviewed me liked me and thought I'd be useful to have around, so I got in anyway. And that was a theology degree, and I didn't want to be an accountant, and Durham does not know what to do with you if you don't want to be an accountant. They sort of point you to the folders, go away. And I almost did a HR qualification, but I'd also applied for a master's in IT, which was massively oversubscribed. But as it happened, female 21 with an arts degree were what the government wanted that year. So I got queued up. My mother phoned me and she said, oh, they called and said they were going to pay all your fees and give you a grant. It was a big grant as well for that year. And but I thought you were all going to do the HR course. No, that sounds even better. They're going to pay me. So I ended up in IT really by accident, and worked in IT for a corporate consulting, corporate IT for about 14 years before, by accident, I ended up as a massage therapist because I wanted to learn more anatomy. I was working 70-hour weeks. The only place I could find to learn anatomy was a massage school at a weekend. So I learned anatomy thinking, I'll just go home at lunchtime. But they sort of made me stay and I got into it. And it turned into a whole new career of bodywork, of teaching massage, of teaching Pilates, of helping people kind of be more present to themselves. And obviously, when you're a massage therapist, you end up being some sort of untrained emotional therapist at the same time, because everybody wants to tell you their story. And you start to see that the story and the body aren't different things. They're the same thing. So how I came into coaching 3 principles non-duality was mostly because of Amazon's algorithm and a video about a bike that steered backwards. And there you have it, really. It came about all by accident. But what I found was I kind of wondered why such little drops of fresh perspective with a massage client made such big differences. And I wondered why the really unorthodox way I'd behaved during my corporate career had worked. And I wondered, I guess, just why my life had worked out the way it had. And suddenly I'd got the answers and it made sense. And it wasn't that, oh, it just makes sense for me. It was like, this makes sense for everybody. And if there's a way of introducing it that's going to actually hit that sweet spot of seeing reality how it is, engaged in life and happy, basically just happy without false pretenses, then it just felt like such a good place to be. And that's what brought me here, I guess.
So great. So great. And listening to you both, I'm sure anyone listening to this, same as me, will be having this just sense of people who are so like us, you know, in the real world, dealing with real stuff, and at the same time, whose life experiences and perspective, I think, capacity for inquiry and curiosity and engagement has led to something that is so profound and so universal and so across the board true and helpful. And so yeah, I'm in awe of you both. And so that is really takes us to this, which is how did it come about? Like how did it come about? What did you want to do with the book? and the process as well of writing it, because that's really like two people collaborating on a book that has so much in it. Must have been an interesting process for you both as well. So tell us everything, because I think I really think this is destined to be a classic. And so let's hear how it originated.
Well, Helen has to start, because it did start with Helen.
It did. Yeah, so I think as part of that journey through 2021, I came to have a much greater sense of clarity around awakening versus enlightenment. And not everybody makes that distinction. Lots of people will just interchange those two words. But I think it became really clear to me that there's two distinct things happening, and that awakening, as we've written about in this book, is the recognition of our essential nature, and just that. That's all it is, which is actually right here every day and every moment. We just don't pay attention. We just aren't directed to point towards that. And that enlightenment is the lightening of the confusions. I know, Claire, you'll use that language, the lightening of the psychological. So where we've got ourselves in a tangle because we've taken a childhood story and kept replaying and replaying and replaying it and ending up in a tangle in life. The undoing of that for me is the enlightenment process, and that's what the next book is going to be on.
I love that, darling, because I was going to ask you, because that was the one thing that you asked me to change in the foreword was how I use those words, and I was really curious. That's really lovely. That's such a great distinction. So helpful.
Well, yeah, it was for me. Like I think as I became more into that space in that year, it was like, oh, it's this. It's the fact of our nature, and then there's a whole world of stuff.
Yeah.
And the whole world of stuff includes our psychology, it includes the body, it includes all of the things, which again, I mean, we touch and we point towards that in this book. The next one will go much deeper into that enlightenment process. But yeah, it just became really clear there's this distinction. And if we can really separate those two things out and get very clear on the awakening process and the enlightenment process as two aspects of the same thing, really, they're mutually supportive, and you do more of one, you get more of the other. The more you awaken, the more you know yourself as that space of awareness, the more the enlightenment happens more easily, because things can't help but be transformed and transmuted in that space. But equally, if you start with some enlightenment stuff, then that's going to support your awakening because you've cleared up some of the confusion. So yeah, mutually supportive. So anyway, the book came to mind, and it kind of touches on what you said, Claire, about, we're people just in life. We've got our respective normal lives with day-to-day challenges, and we've had normal careers, and we're both pretty practical people. And that's always been really important to me through this exploration, because I never, I always kept away from spirituality because I just thought it was all woo-woo, the stuff that gets wrapped up in one big lump as, oh, that's woo-woo, no, put that in the cupboard, we don't need to pay attention to that, we've got practical science over here that we can pay attention to. So that kind of had been my life up until the last couple of years. So the desire came for this clarity of a little book of awakening, which was the original title, and a little book of enlightenment, and for them to be practical.
Very big, complete book.
Yeah, complete, absolutely. We'll talk about that bit of the story. So yeah, I wanted it to be practical, wanted it to be real, wanted it to be for everybody in everyday life, not for mystics and gurus and for, oh, you have to be a special person to get this or see this, or we wanted it to be, the original idea came through as it wanted to be practical, and therefore it seemed that I and Sarah have been the perfect conduits for that, because we also love the practical, we love the let's make this real. So that was really the beginning of it. And then so about a year ago, Sarah was doing some webinars, and I just happened to pop on to one to see what Sarah was up to these days. And it was like, oh my God, yeah, Sarah, of course, Sarah would be amazing to write this book with. Dropped her a message, what do you reckon, Sarah? Do you want to collaborate on this book? And had that, as we often do when we've like pushed into something new or different, it's like, oh God, is that the right thing to do? Have I done the right thing? but yes, absolutely. It was when Sara came back saying yes. And at that point, it was kind of, I was thinking back to this the other day, Sara, it was funny. Do you remember when we started at that point and you were like, yeah, I could do whatever you want. It can be you write the book and I'll just do a bit of editing, or we can talk about that more in a minute in terms of how the writing actually happened, because it wasn't anything like I think how either of us thought it would be in the beginning there. But yeah, Sara, tell us from the point at which I'd messaged you.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'd probably been asked that same question maybe 3 or 4 times over the last few years, and most times it'd been, well, let me look at your material, followed by no. Because I'm quite picky about where I put my time, but it kind of just made sense because this wasn't like a duplicate of somebody else's book or a my story of my tragedy and how I turned it around book. This was it was something new. And in fact, when my friend Amir read it, he only read it because he felt like he owed me a favor. Not quite sure why he thinks he owes me a favor, but I keep playing on it. And he basically said, there is no space for any more books. It has all been said. It has all been done. And after about 2 hours, he came back and said, I was wrong. This is different. And so I think that difference and I think what Helen really triggered in me is this absolute desire to like empower people, to put, like, sound like some terrible TV dating show, but to put the power in people's hands.
I'd go on that show.
They literally put the power in your hands thing. That felt like so important, that we don't just give people a teaching and we don't just give them a meditation practice, because those are both really useful, but they are, we're not going to try and compete with your books, Claire, because they do what they're meant to do, right? There's lots of people across the field who are real experts in what they do. And the one thing is that sometimes people struggle to take it from the page into their own life. And that was what Helen really triggered for me, was this is a way that we empower people to do it for themselves with guidance. And so that's where we started.
Brilliant. What really struck me, and it was evident, like what you were saying about Amir, that what really struck me within a couple of paragraphs and then pages and then chapters is how totally original it is. Like that, because we all of us read so many books and we hear the same stories being repeated around the place and the same sort of stuff, and some of it is beautiful poetry that speaks to your soul, but still can be sort of samey. But this is like every page there's like, oh my God, I've never read that before, or I've never heard anyone say that before, or I've never heard that being described in that particular way. And it's really remarkable to for something that is so universally true to be so fresh at the same time. You really have created something completely original. And just open up this really, have you ever had scrambled eggs, like and awesome, like really, really awesome, these things that are so everyday in our life. So for both of you, where has your inspiration come from? What's been that process?
Where's the inspiration come from? From life, from source, from the universe, from
The kitchen.
Well, yeah, so that specific one was I was running a non-dual session with a group with another coach, and it occurred to me how there was a point where I was getting really emphatic. It was like, oh, but God, I really want you to see this. And I know that's always a sign that I'm too far away from clarity to actually communicate something clearly. And I was like, there must be a metaphor in this. There must be an ideally a food metaphor, because I love food metaphors, that will help communicate this. And so that's what led to the scrambled eggs one, because I first went through an iteration of cake. and there was too much confusion within that one.
Yeah.
So yes, it ended up at scrambled eggs.
It's brilliant.
But,
Like
yeah,
for people, just it's like it's pointing to the essential, isn't it? Like what is
yeah.
the essence, and what is the stuff that can be added in but doesn't affect the essential? And yeah,
and I guess as an example of, like, I would have heard Rupert Spira use that kind of phrase, your essential self. I'd have heard that over and over and over again. But for many years, it didn't really land.
yes.
And then it's like, well, how else can that be communicated? How else can that be said? That it's in that, I guess, practical again, that tangible, that, back to Sarah's point, putting the power back in the individual's hands, that the heart has to have heard something, that the heart will hear Rupert's words of essential nature. But yeah, the purpose of this book really is it's that bridge of logic, Sarah, that you so brilliantly bring into this, and which was what I first heard you talk about in that webinar as well. But let's actually see it. Let's look at that for ourselves. Let's not just rely on those words sound nice that Rupert's saying. Let's actually see that and see it clearly.
And the scrambled eggs metaphor it's much less personally challenging than who you think you are.
Yes.
Although, to be fair, our first book group did get into a little bit of a debate about how to make scrambled eggs. Like there were a lot of opinions, and it was great because they could disagree with each other about the important ingredients, although they did all come down to what was essential and what was merely very, very, very important to them. But it meant that they could, every time what follows got a bit heavy for them, which is really getting into quite deep stuff about who you are and who you think you are and who you believe yourself to be and what you think that means. We could say, yeah, but remember the scrambled eggs. You might do it Heston's way and somebody else might do it Little Chef's way, which is open a packet and put it in the microwave and everything in between. And so it gave them something they could kind of laugh again, and they could go, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. Because I think one of the things for me, I don't want to put words in Helen's mouth, was that the very traditional way of teaching this is the clearing away, that old netty path. Oh, well, you're not this, you're not this, you're not this, until there's nothing left. And then because everything's so pure and clean, you'll realize who you are. But that works in a community, like in a physical community. And it can take years. I have a friend who was in that kind of community for 30 years before she was considered ready for this stage. But if somebody gets up at midnight and says, what's the meaning of life or awakeness or something, and they fall across a Rupert video or a Francis Lucille or one of your podcasts, by 6 a.m. they've kind of heard everything there is to be heard, in not necessarily in a way that they'll understand, and there's plenty of different ways to say it, but they will have had this wham of, this is the truth of who you are. So we can't start with cleaning up the mind and body. We can't start with enlightening. We have to start with, this is who you are, but then use it as a springboard and as a foundation at the same time to say what you're not, who you're not. And I think that chapter 5 is such a wonderful pivot between the two, because it keeps giving somebody something to go back to when their sense of self is challenged, when they get upset about the idea that their mother isn't essential to them, or their job isn't essential to them, or their hair color isn't essential to them. So yeah, I think that a lot of how the book came about was that it's like we've got to write for real people in a real world, and just because that's sounds like it's a really ordinary way of talking, it's not. It's still quite a challenging way of talking, and I think that a lot of the structure of the book came about, well, how does it work in this century, in the internet age, at a point where people are partners or parents or carers, or they have jobs, they have hobbies, they're not meditating for 10 hours a day unless they really want to. They're not living in an ashram unless they really want to. They're living just the same as somebody who isn't happy. They're living the same lives and the same patterns. And most of all, they don't need a lot of it to change. What they want is to be sure of who they are and to be able to express that in their life. So they're no longer seeking it. And that's what changes each experience. That was a rant, sorry.
No, it was amazing. Yeah, I mean, it really does that, this book. It's genius in that way. And I think, you know, looking at you both and from what I know about it, couldn't really have come from anyone else. You know, people. It's that amazing mix of absolute respect and intimacy with people, isn't it? With people and what people go through and the lives that we all live, and at the same time, this such solid beautiful space of love, I would say. Really, that's for me, that's what really permeates it, is, and that with like a very liberal splattering of humor all the way through it. And it's just beautiful. So how would you, what would you expect for people reading it? How would they use it in a way? What would you say to someone?
Do you want to start this time, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. I think that it was brilliant that we had the first book group so early, which I'm sure Helen suggested, and we didn't actually have a book at that stage. So it was useful to have the challenge of finishing enough for them to have something to read every week. But halfway through the book group, one of the guys said, "This isn't really a book, this is like a workshop." And what we realized was, oh, okay, yeah, it is kind of like a workshop. It's a series of workshops. So I think that if people approach it that way, and we're just in the process of creating the self-study course, so that people have something more to follow. But essentially, each chapter is like a mini workshop with an introduction, a set of really interactive experiments, and a working conclusion. And I think we've been clear all along that there's nothing set in stone. It's these are suggestions for how you explore. And I think what we really love is where people start to create their own experiments, where they start to ask themselves questions and use the tools that we're offering to explore it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Sarah. I think it's absolutely that. It's a book that you could just read it if you wanted to. You know, like if Amir came back to you in a couple of hours, Sarah, and I know that Simon Mundy came back to me within like a few days, they'd obviously just read it as a book as you would read any other book, and for them that's okay because they've already seen stuff. So it's kind of and they were doing it for helping us with reviews as well. So there was a reason for reading it quickly. And so anybody could read it quickly. Anybody could just read it like any other book, page. You just won't get the same effect. I reckon it will have an effect just being read like that, but it will be nothing like the effect you get when you genuinely engage with the explorations and actually look for yourself. And really, even if you think you know this stuff, to look at the explorations genuinely, because we've had some people both in the book group and others in our worlds who might have had that, oh yeah, I know that, no, I don't need to do that experiment, but actually when they did then look, when they did then engage, it's like, oh wow, I've just seen something entirely new with that. So it does invite that, always coming with an open mind. You know, for us too, if Sarah or I were to read it again, we would see, all of us, we see fresh stuff every single time we engage with these kind of explorations. It's like each time fresh, beginner's mind, open mind. We look again and again and again, and each time deeper. There's it really does seem there's infinite available to be seen with it. So yeah, if you really want the most, definitely engage with it like that.
I really, I absolutely get that, because each exploration is so distinct in itself, isn't it? And it's, I mean, you could just do one exploration a year, and
There was a reader who said he'd made it part of his morning practice. So just as his habit, he's been getting up every morning, doing his normal breakfast, brush his teeth, 20 minutes of book each day, and working through however much of the book he gets done in 20 minutes. But that's been only just over a month. He's finished it already, in that way, and has had, he messaged me one day going, oh my God, so if this awareness is infinite and has no boundaries, it's the same awareness as everybody. We're all the same awareness. Like it is completely landed. So there is huge reward on the other side. Although actually, Sarah, perhaps we should talk about that a bit, because we know that one of the barriers to these kind of books is the desire to get something from it.
Yes, good.
Do you want to talk about that?
That's always a conundrum, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, some people will literally they'll work through it in that really quick way, and it does only maybe take a few weeks. We've picked the sort of the 12-week mark because we think that's very doable and very manageable for most people. And it is an infinite exploration. But there's also this point at which you can say, oh, yeah, I get it, I feel it, and I'm going to let that sink in and settle into just how I see life now. So you can continue to explore in whatever way makes sense, or you continue to live in whatever way makes sense. And I think that leads into what you just said, is that the book is not a prescription on how to live life. There's no practices, but that doesn't mean that they're banned. It just means we're not prescribing practices. There's no rules. There's no little list that says, now you're awakened, you will eat like this and exercise like this and speak like this. I always thought that I'd know when I'd arrived, because I'd speak much more like Rupert Spira, much more measured and careful. And some days I still can't work out how to say topsy-turvy in a way that doesn't use a lot of swear words. So really. So we really wanted to say to people, this is about this coming home to yourself, so that when you start to express yourself rather than look for yourself, it shows up your way. And if that shows up as being a climate change activist, or sitting really quietly at home, or being an active member of a parent-teacher association, or being a very enthusiastic dentist or dog walker or grandparent, or so it's normal to have an expectation of what's going to come out of it. But we wanted to just rein it in to say, there's all kinds of possibilities in your own unique expression. But this doesn't mean that your partner is suddenly going to become an Adonis who behaves brilliantly. Well, it hasn't happened here yet. It doesn't mean that flowers are going to turn their heads and look at you as you walk along the road. It doesn't mean you're going to live in a state of bliss necessarily. It just puts you in an embodied, lived understanding of who you are. And everything else that follows is pretty much secondary. Not that we won't celebrate it, but just that we can't tell you what it looks like. But the one little bit that I think that a concession that we can claim is the wonderful Netty quiz, which is freely available online, although the online version does have a mistake that we've corrected when we've moved it into our resources. It's available to everybody, and it's the simplest possible set of questions that just show, if you have this knowing of who you are, if you are seeing reality as it is in a real way and not just an intellectual way, you are likely to be noticing these characteristics about how you don't get distressed as easily, that emotions show up, but they kind of roll through and you come back to a balance, that you do feel mostly a sense of okayness, that you do find situations easier, and so on and so on. They're very simple questions, and I think that's the level at which we can say that we think there's a commonality. And the wonderful thing with the book group is, obviously they did this quiz at the beginning and the end, and most of them saw really significant differences. So that's something that we carry on offering people.
Yeah, the common theme at the end of that, wasn't it? It was life's still roller coastering, life's still going up and down, and I feel okay. That was the common message that came through at the end of that original book group, which is exactly the description of awakening.
Yeah.
Life is doing what life is doing, and I'm okay.
Yeah.
But it's the other way around. Like you said, Sarah, it's the life comes secondary. I am okay. And life is continuing to roller coaster, because that's just what life will do. So this is absolutely about getting to that recognition of I'm okay. I am okayness always, already. And that being the primary purpose, not in order to feel better, not in order to get a better life, not in order to get this Adonis husband. I love that. It's not in order to anything.
Write that book as well.
How to get an Adonis husband. Yeah, so the pure and singular purpose is to recognize your essential nature, full stop.
Yeah.
Not in order to anything. Yeah.
Yeah. And you've done it so brilliantly. Oh my goodness. One of our last few questions, because I have to go soonish. But also, first of all, I realised I didn't even say your full names at the start. Rubbish at this interview thing. Sara Priestley, Helen Amery, and the book is The Complete Book of Awakening. If you're just listening to this on the podcast. And can I ask you? So I love this distinction between awakening and enlightenment, and how the enlightenment is a process of sort of living revelation, isn't it? And healing, I guess, really at the same, healing that conditioning of separation and belief that would have us as something other than our truth. And how has writing this book been in terms of that for you both? Like as a process of living and creating, has there been revelations for you?
I don't know if I could pin them specifically to the book. There've probably been a couple. I've no doubt there have been times when, because life is always our mirror, there's probably been times when, Sarah, you've been a mirror for me to see something in myself. I think both of us are pretty hardworking, and so that's been amazing to see that. It's like, oh yeah, this is like me looking at me from another perspective. But yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was in the writing of it, there was that deepening into the knowing of this even more. It was as we wrote it, as we collected the explorations together and refined them and edited them and added in ones that the other one hadn't heard of. It was to me it was a deepening and more grounding into that space.
Yeah, there was a real, I think for me there was a real going sense of, this can work. Like, because there's a big difference from the idea to like seeing it unfold. And some of the explorations started off as 3, and then oh goodness, they're all the same. And one exploration started off, 5 explorations actually started off as 1. And it was one that Helen wrote first time, and I was like, whoa, I think I'm going to need to breathe.
This has been Sarah's gift to the book. I would go blah, 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 put loads and loads and loads into one little thing, and then Sarah would come along and go, okay, let's just spread that all out quite a lot into.
What would be an example of that?
That exploration, you say, Sarah.
I think it was chapter 12. I think chapter 12 was a single exploration, and I was like, like it's a G-force thing. I was up against the wall thinking, oh my goodness, this is just so rich, so packed, and deserves to be unpacked and spread out. Whereas some earlier in the book, I'd gone, these three are identical. What we're going to do. And so structure and flow became really important. But you asked us right at the beginning how the writing process worked. And literally, Helen wrote most of the first draft, and then I edited most of it, and then re-edited, and then I'd write a whole batch, and then Helen edited it. And 90% of that was done in a shared document.
Wow.
We just added comments, added text, took text out, moved text, threw everything back up in the air. We kept saying, what's the journey of this chapter? Where are we going from and to? What are we trying to convey? How are we trying to convey it? What's somebody going to take away with them? And we just did that over and over again with the whole book, with the parts, with the chapters, with each exploration. Each one had that same rigor of why are we writing it? So there are 80,000 words, but not many of them are wasted.
No. I love that. I mean, it's an enormous achievement to collaborate in that way, and not a single word is wasted. I mean, that is just, that's what I think will hit anyone who's reading it, is that each word, we sort of almost in a way we can sort of sense that whole editing process that's gone, like, so each word is like sort of containing depths and depths and depths and depths, even though the sentence, you know, what's essential about scrambled eggs day is so simple and straightforward. The thinking behind it, and the wealth, the richness behind it is palpable. Really, I really sense that. Oh, you two, such an achievement what you've done. I love it. I love it. What if you were going to say something to the people listening to this now who are maybe, like you said at the start, you know, maybe struggling, maybe not happy, maybe sort of carried along on that roller coaster and being with big stuff, like really big stuff going on, and feeling completely knocked all over the place by life. What would you say to them?
Gosh, well, genuinely depends how big the stuff is. So we're really careful at the start of the book to say, check in with yourself. Sarah's talked about how the book takes you through explorations which will challenge your identity. They will challenge the beliefs you've come to think about who you are and what you need in order to be okay. And when those things are challenged, we can easily feel off balance. So we did have people in the book group getting cross with us, feeling frustrated, feeling off balance, saying, what the hell are you doing to me? And needing a little bit of space, even if it was just going and hanging out the washing, but needing to like recenter before they could come back to the book again. So we do say at the beginning of the book, you need to be responsible for yourself in terms of, how am I? Am I feeling generally okay enough? So life might not be perfect. It is usually not perfect when we come to books like this, because we are looking for something to help us. So if you feel in the normal range of life is tough right now and I could really do with some help, then cool. But if it's more of a mental health crisis, or a bigger situation where you've got mental health specialists in your team, or other similar circumstances, then we would really encourage you to check with them and check in with yourself. We are our own best barometers with mental health support, if we have that in place, to say, is this the book for me right now? And if at any point you're reading it and you're thinking, this is too much, cool, just put it down, and you'll be guided when to pick it back up again. We don't need to work hard at that. You'll happen to come across it one day accidentally, and it will be the perfect book again for you. So you can trust that if it's a toing and froing kind of experience, that's okay too. But yeah, really, it's really about looking after yourself through the process.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And we genuinely see the awakening process as putting people in a much better position to move in life with flow and ease and grace. But that doesn't eliminate the practical. you know, we still use staircases to go from one floor to another. We still brush our hair occasionally. I do brush my hair, even an audio podcast.
Example
you know, we clean our teeth, we cook food, we talk to friends, and the book is not a replacement for any of those. It just puts us in a position to engage with reality as it is, and not based on some idea of when I get over there, everything will start to work. And so people can be really damn practical once they've awakened. Doesn't mean you can't be practical without it, but it's just a much lighter version of it.
Brilliant. Oh, I love you two so much. I'm full of admiration. Absolutely in awe of you both. I love what you've done. It's a book of love that is like the most practical, funny, gorgeous thing that anyone could read. So thank you for being the conduits for such excellent wisdom. And yeah, thank you both.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
Oh, such a
Really
pleasure.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, my darlings. Bye.
That's love. Bye.